Hey everyone, welcome to episode 24 of the Ceres podcast. In this episode, we talk to Robin Sheppard from the Bespoke Hotels. Bespoke Hotels are a group of 200 or so luxury hotels all over the world, but they're completely unique, and that's what makes them special. Robin is an absolute gentleman. We had a great conversation about hotels, online booking systems, recession, Brexit, lots of happy things. And more importantly, we talk about how he was afflicted with a Gillian Barre syndrome, and I've probably said that wrong. I've just finished Robin's book, A Solitary Confinement, just after the podcast, but it was such a brilliant book. You wouldn't think you could recover from what he had, let alone be happy and as busy as what he is today. If you want to buy the book, I've listed it in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you on the other side. Robin Sheppard, thank you for your time today. Would you like to tell people your day-to-day role and what it is that you do and the company you're from?
Stelios, I'd be delighted. My full name is Robin Michael Philpott Sheppard, and I keep very quiet about the two middle names as far as I can. I've been in the hotel business for over 45 years and fell into the industry in my school holiday period when I was looking for part-time jobs, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. But currently I run an independent hotel company which has in excess of 90 hotels in the UK and a large number overseas. Each hotel is different in terms of its look and feel. Everyone's a local hero. And the whole point of the company, which is called Bespoke Hotels, was to aggregate hotels with personality and individuality, going in completely the opposite direction to all the other hotel companies who are trying to make everything look the same. And if I look at pretty much every high street in Britain now, I see W.H. Smith to my left, next to Cafe Nero, just opposite Boots, and it all looks so similar. And I think, why have we allowed this to become so dull and so predictable and so confusing? I can walk down a high street pretty much anywhere in Britain, and I haven't got enough milestones to say, oh, that's the local community, that's what this place stands for. So I think it's a fairly aspirational, lofty aspirational cause on our part, but it's worked for us over the last 20 years.
It's quite an American thing, isn't it, for us to become very homogenised? Like you say, you've got your Starbucks, your Cafe Nero, everything sort of. And was it? Did people sort of think it was a risky move going down the route you wanted to go down at the beginning?
Well, we didn't tell many people, so we didn't get too much opposition. It was my partner and I, Hayden Phantom, and I got together just over 20 years ago and realised that we had a reasonably compatible skill set. Hayden tends to look at most businesses from the bottom line and works upwards, and I tend to look at them from the top line and work downwards. So we don't have too many rows, but we somehow intuitively seem to end up in the same space. I don't think either of us ever thought that a partner was necessarily what we were looking for in business, but I have to say I cherish the time that we've had together, and it's been a great pleasure and privilege to work alongside someone who I'm still learning from 20 years later.
It's a pretty amazing place to be, isn't it, really?
It's a sweet spot.
You were telling me when we met before how you got into the industry. So tell everyone else, how did you get into the hospitality industry?
Well, I'd done holiday jobs delivering the post, putting leaflets through people's doors, and I got a job in a hotel in the West Country where we had a Polynesian restaurant, and this was at an age when I was 15 and 3/4 years old.
Very specific.
Very specific. And I arrived on the Saturday evening to clock on at about 6 o'clock in the evening, and the very tall and very thin general manager was there. He was so long and thin that everybody called him Streaky Bacon. And I was so naive that I had no idea what his real name was, and I just called him Mr. Bacon all the time. Mr. Bacon had obviously had a few schooners of sherry during the afternoon, so as I arrived, I saw him draped over the bar in a state of some inebriation. "Good evening, Mr. Bacon," I said. "How are you, sir?" "Everything all right?" No, I'm not all right. My wife's just run off with the restaurant manager, at which point he pirouetted, put his right arm up in the air like a ballerina, and then collapsed over a coffee table, knocking himself clean out. And as the cut glass ashtray shattered into smithereens, I remember thinking, he looks in a bit of a state here. So the training crept in very quickly, and I put a napkin over his face and dragged him by the armpits and shoved him into a broom cupboard, horse whispering into his ears, "I guess this means you won't be taking the orders in the restaurant tonight, sir." And it was one of those sink or swim dinner dances. We had 180 people for dinner, 2 auxiliary waitresses and myself. And being a sink or swim evening, we managed to sink without trace. My finest moment was when I was pushing the pudding trolley towards one particular couple, and the lady looked up and said, "Waiter, is the fruit salad fresh?" And I came out with the dreadful line, "It's fresh out of a tin, madam." Oh. I got home to my parents and said, "I'm never, ever, 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 ever working in the hotel industry ever again." Yeah. And I've been doing it ever since, so there we are.
Well, you must have loved it.
Well, the absurdity, the immediacy, the adrenaline pump, all sorts of heady ingredients went into my particular cocktail, and I look back at it and think it was a very fortunate decision by accident, but it seemed to light me up and give me a stage to perform on, and I've much to be grateful to the hotel industry for as a result.
So you went on to university, you worked for British Transport Hotels, Bristol Hotel Group, and then you created the Furlong Hotel Group, which is now Bespoke Hotels.
Yes.
You know, looking back over the years, what's something that you really learnt that, you know, from all those, you know, that made you want to just go and do your own business? Because not many people would say, "I want one hotel," let alone as many as you've got now.
Well, I remember leaving college thinking that there was one particular hotel that I wanted to run, and that was the limit of my ambitions, which was a property called the Ligon Arms in Broadway, and I was terribly fortunate at a very young, in fact, too young age of 27 3/4, recurring theme, to be appointed as the general manager of what is still the quintessential English country house in a beautiful part of the world, and at a time when the dollar was incredibly strong against the pound, so we just had Americans coming out of every orifice in the building. Quite extraordinary time. And I had a boss then who was the chairman of the company, non-exec chairman, but still a fantastic teacher called Douglas Barrington, an Australian by birth, but a genius in terms of emotional intelligence and anticipation of what guests needed. And his ability to make a guest feel really special, I just thought, I have to learn from this guy. He wasn't an easy taskmaster. He didn't suffer fools gladly, and I made plenty of mistakes in that time, but I had 3 years where I learnt a huge amount, and it felt, with hindsight, as though it was a great graduation working alongside someone like that. So I'm much to be grateful for there. My time with British Transport Hotels was at a period when that particular group still contained magnificent hotels like Gleneagles, which is now world famous, Turnberry, which unfortunately is world famous because Donald Trump owns it, places like the Old Course in St Andrews, which was a beautiful place on the east coast of Scotland to work in. So it was a fine period of training with that particular company, I must say.
And so now you mention it, like someone like, you know, Donald Trump, like, if we look at him as a business person and forget the other side, has he done well at that hotel, would you say? Like,
well, if you ask Donald if he'd done well, he's going to tell you he's doing great. Yeah. And nobody else has ever had an idea that was better than his idea at all times. I have no idea. The true success of a hotel is either through longevity at an excellent level or by buying it at a cute price and selling it on at an even cuter price. So until he exits some of his properties, I'm not too sure how to judge that, I must say. But has he endeavoured to bring some prosperity and investment to Scotland on both coasts? Yes, he has. Do I like the way he's treating Mexico at the moment? I'm not too sure. But who am I to judge? Right now, in this country, the pound is very weak against the dollar. It feels awfully like the time I was at the Ligon all those years ago, because the international tourism is so strong in the UK, which has brilliantly masked what's been going on with our own economy.
Well, we wanted to touch on the economy later on, actually. So
okay.
I have some great questions there, actually, I think. But so at the moment, Bespoke Hotels, my last guess, I might be way off here, is 18 countries, 200 hotels, 9,000 employees. You mentioned the focus on brand individuality. And you really do celebrate being unique. So would you say that you've got is there something that pulls all these hotels together? Obviously they're all bespoke hotels, but do you have a loyalty scheme to sort of get people to travel from one hotel to another, or are they completely?
Yes, we do, but you don't do this by accruing points and staying in one hotel bedroom in Los Angeles and then redeeming that point by coming to Cannes and staying there for the same company. Ours are very individual properties, and we tend to find our customers will behave in a particular way. They'll have needs to be in the Cornish coast at certain times, sometimes in the Scottish Highlands, sometimes they'll have urban needs and want to be in central London. But what they're looking for is a boutique or unusual or particular stay which has got personality. We have one property in London which is originally designed by Anushka Hempel, which is beautifully linear in all that it's done, very muted tones, and for some people it's very zen and very calming and a great place to be. To others they'd find it a bit dull because it doesn't have a bar. It's a vegan restaurant and it's very much a body wholesome aspect. Incredibly popular with single female travellers for some fairly obvious reasons. But the other hotels we've got, we have hotels in Blackpool, we have them in Edinburgh. We've got plenty of variety, and I just think the thing we strive to achieve is a sense of great hospitality. You want to go somewhere where the staff genuinely are delighted to see you. They're not just moderately pleased and smiling gently at you. They're thrilled that you've walked through the door and want to engage and give you a great time.
That's pretty amazing, because there's a lot of hotels these days where you don't get that. It's not factored into their cost base. So
no, it isn't, and maybe it's slightly old-fashioned, but it's something that we've tried to achieve over the many years we've been at it, and hopefully people enjoy working with us and our customers enjoy coming back to us because we try to anticipate what they want and make them feel unique.
And with tourism being on the high, would you say, UK bound, how would you say that the hotel business has been this year and maybe last year?
Last year was exceptionally strong through a whole range of domestic and international tourism trends, but it was almost exclusively leisure driven. The recession in the UK, I feel, really started last year. And nobody's talking about it at the moment, and we may come on to discuss that in greater detail, but it's certainly been a factor. This year, the staycation is still around as something people want and enjoy. The corporate British market still is very sleepy, and I don't think the corporate Britain has ever really come out of the last recession. But leisure Britain has. I'm definitely seeing a winds of change now. We saw a fallow period around March when we thought we were coming out of the EU. We're definitely seeing some strange and strong headwinds hitting us now as we go towards the March the 31st over the edge of the cliff without a parachute move that Mr. Johnson thinks is a good idea. So we should see whether he's right or not.
So if we look at the recession, then we'll jump onto Brexit. So I mentioned that I was in London a few weeks ago, and there was property after property, especially Islington. I couldn't believe the amount of properties that were empty. And everyone always says if there's property empty in London, there's a recession. And then others were saying that they don't feel like we ever came out of recession, really. So, what sort of risks is that to the hotel business if you see like a recession coming, especially a boutique hotel with sort of high-end hotels?
I think it's a terrible risk to consumption. I think the new generation of kids coming up through the snowflake period and the noughties, they don't drink as much. They don't want to buy as many sofas as the previous generations. They're looking for experiences. They're looking for travel. But they don't need to own things in the same way. And an awful lot of them, my own children included, buying your own place to live, let alone a place to live in London, is really, really hard. So you get used to renting and things passing through. So I think that trend through the younger audience has been in place for some time. Then you put the headwinds into the mix of retail going out of fashion and an awful lot of department stores no longer being viable. And the high street has just been in brutal carnage over the last year or so. Restaurant chains going bust, House of Fraser, Debenhams, all the big household names that used to be synonymous with why you went shopping in town centres, allied, of course, to the rise of Amazon and home distribution. I'm never cease to be amazed. I can be idling away with my phone, press a button, and within 24 hours on a Sunday, something I ordered in an idle moment has just arrived, freshly packed and beautifully delivered at a time which would be incredibly awkward to a conventional shopkeeper, but is perfect for me because that's when I'm in at the house on a Sunday. So certainly as a man, I'm shopping very, very differently to how I used to. I've never really subscribed to the more female perspective that you'd buy 7 dresses in order to select one and send 6 back.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm strangely built in that way, but so therefore I don't want or need to shop in perhaps the same way that others might.
So if you think hotels, well, they're not all in the countryside, but obviously the nicer ones probably are, but then if you've got a nice hotel in a city and it's being decimated because there's no shops there anymore or whatever, how does that play with you a little bit?
Well, what I've seen across the entire country is that the bedroom sales have held up pretty well over the last 18 months. Booze sales have been going down unless it's a special occasion or someone celebrating a wedding or a birthday or an anniversary. So general discretionary spend on booze has been going down. There's also a move towards healthier food, the rise of the vegan menu, the rise of the vegetarian option, less and less preference for steaks, a nervousness about eating the wrong fish. So we're becoming much more delicate and picky in terms of our food and drink consumption. Plus, people are being more cautious. I hinted at it earlier on, but I think we've been in recession for about 18 months, and we haven't even started to talk about the motorcar trade, which is looking at the lowest levels of sales for new cars it's ever had since the Second World War. So we are in unprecedented times at the moment.
I think that the government has literally just, no one's really spoke about anything other than Brexit for a long time, and I think, but it's not like we came out of the 2008 recession, really strong anyway. I think so, but I think we got the bends in doing it. If you come up from deep sea diving, you need to come up slowly. And when we came out of the recession in 2010, 2011, I think we came back up to the surface, and pre-recessionary inflation was so rabid at such a rapid pace that suddenly people were looking at businesses being sold for the same sort of multiples that they would have been sold pre-recession, which is where we got into trouble in the first place. Yeah. So by and large, if you looked at a hotel and it makes a certain amount of money, you typically multiply that by about 10 to give you what the value of the business is, valued as a business rather than just a piece of real estate. So if you can buy for something slightly less than 10 and you can sell for something more than 10, both parties are doing quite well. But as soon as we came out of the last recession, people were looking at what are called PE ratios or price-earning ratios at 12, 13, 14%. Well, those are not sustainable. Those businesses never succeed because you overpay. Yeah. And certainly the last 2 years I've seen in the UK market, people have been buying real estate at crazy, crazy prices, which have no other rational reason to remain in place because they're just too high. And it seems to be that obviously will have a knock-on effect on the rent because, I've seen some crazy figures bandied about for rent, especially in prime locations. Yeah. And is that half the problem as to why, the likes of, I'm saying half the problem because I don't want to blame it all on this, but, if you've got like Jamie Oliver's taking on these really expensive sites, then surely it's hard to make, the balance, the books work.
Well, Jamie's books are the bit that do work. Okay. His book sales are fantastic. If you just stick to doing that and not running any restaurants, you'd be fine. I feel very sorry for him because I do think there was good intention there. But he took his eye off the ball in one or two areas, and this is not a crusade against him, but I think he was picking up sites that were secondary and tertiary in terms of paying too much rent, and then the quality of the product. I just don't think enough day-to-day attention was being paid to the swift service, the quality of the meals, and so on. So I think it became a very vicious spiral downwards. And quite often, if you put venture capital money into a brand, the panacea has always seen how quickly can you roll it out and have lots more of these, and you end up trying to place the money into sites which are not strong enough. If you grow in a more cautious and studious way, you might sustain a much better long-term business.
Well, I think there's an argument that the venture capital money sort of hides the fact that some of those businesses don't make money, but they've got growth.
Well, they've got growth, and some of the original founding units were traded incredibly well and gave everybody optimism, end up underpinning the stuff that's new and isn't doing so well. And you expand too quickly. And we, for us, in our business, to get to 90-plus hotels has taken us 20 years. Someone said to me the other day, that's a long time to be an overnight success. And I said, well, that suits me just fine.
Yeah. A friend of mine, he trades a lot in stocks and shares, and he saw a stock for a restaurant, and he goes, I'd never buy restaurant shares. And I says, why? He goes, because they can't grow like tech companies. And I wonder what's the benefit of putting this money into these sort of restaurants, because they can only grow so much. You can't, your profit isn't like a tech company or an app or,
No, but I think if you looked at a really seasoned investor like Richard Caring, who's very famous for rolling out car loot shows and buying Annabelles and so on, he's taken one concept called the Ivy, which is a very famous single restaurant. He's rolled it up to, a vast number of towns in the UK. He won't hang around too long. He knows it's past the parcel. You take a great idea, you roll it out, you keep growing, sell, and then let the other guy worry about how to run a mature, stabilised business. Not easy. His game is always, I'll keep playing till the music stops, and I'll get out just before the music stops.
Very interesting. Well, it'll be interesting to see what he does with his then.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised to see him exiting his businesses pretty soon. He's a sharp up. Richard Branson was the same. It was never so sentimental. He held on to things for too long.
Interesting. Well, if we see that's our marker then. If we see Richard Caring, you said it here. So opportunities and risks of the hotel business. So opportunities are obviously people coming through because the pound's low, but then obviously how does that work with the other countries? So you've got how many hotels abroad?
We've got another 110 hotels overseas. Our business with those hotels is mainly to move a UK-centric audience abroad. So if you're in the Caribbean or Koh Samui, our business is to try and get a British customer base to those hotels and make sure they're looked after okay. Where we have no expertise and don't attempt to rule any markets would be moving a German audience or a French indigenous audience around the place. So we just stick to English-speaking territories primarily.
That makes sense.
And we form partnerships overseas. We have quite an interesting little residential complex in Palm Jumeirah in Dubai. So we provide the marketing and the booking facility. But we have a local arrangement with a company that does all the housekeeping and the reception and the maintenance and so on. So,
what sort of experiences have you had going to different countries? Because obviously in Britain we have our customs where we set up businesses and laws, and was there anything tricky that you had to sort of like look out for?
I think with the Arab states it's much more complicated because you have to be very observant and deferential to not working on a Friday, the week starting on a Sunday, the dress code, the when to have a drink, when not to be seen to be having a drink. So there's a number of protocols that we probably should have mugged up on even more furiously before we entered those territories. But where we've had success is where we've not been blindly arrogant and partnered up with people who have local expertise. Where we've had failure has been where we've just thought, well, we can sort this from London and it'll be an empirical view of how to grow, and that's when we've fallen over. So
it might cost a little bit more to get partners on board, but it's probably more a probability of a success.
We made enough mistakes to know that that's the really only sustainable way to grow overseas.
So let's say since 2008, what's probably changed the most in the UK for the hotel business is that now we have sort of aggregators like Booking.com, Trivago, Hotel.com, things like that. How does that work, with you guys? Is it a negative? Is it a positive? Did it take you, or are you still deciding?
I think it's fantastic and it's here to stay. Now, let me just take you back in history. Before the internet came along and before Booking.com created the market dominance that it has, if you had a hotel business in the provinces that was delivering over 70% occupancy in a year, you thought you were doing really, really well.
70%.
These days, that marker is over 80%. So most operators in the UK would be very unhappy if their business was doing less than 80%. Why? because you're dealing with such a perishable product, it's not like an avocado or a banana that you might be able to sell the next day or the day after. Once a room's not been sold that evening, you can't sell it again. You've lost that opportunity. So the internet has been sensational in terms of getting a really broad access to market relatively cheaply. And how else could you get that sort of scale and not pay up front for it, because you're paying on success? Yes, there's a joining fee to belong to Booking.com, but it's relatively inexpensive. But the return, albeit at a reasonably high commission, is that you've got instant sales that you could never reach on your own. So I'm for it. I don't want them to get so dominant and so arrogant that they start bossing us around much more than they currently do. But I think we should all take a step back in history and say, well, how much more proficient are we at filling bedrooms now as a result of the internet, whereas we were before?
And do you think that, do they tend to sort of take the customer side more in certain things, or the hotel side? Are they quite balanced, would you say?
No, they're not balanced. The hoteliers have become wholesalers.
Yeah.
It was around about 2006 when we stopped being retailers. And the likes of Expedia, Booking.com and so on have become so dominant in that time whilst we were asleep at the wheel, that we have to accept that they're here to stay now, and we just have to work with them. The key thing is that we can always give those online travel agents an amount of stock, and we control how many rooms we give them every day to sell. So if we're unhappy with them or they're not doing what we want, we just reduce the allocation to them and just say, we're full, we can't give you any more rooms. So if you want to book, you've got to come in directly. So you still have the ability to open and close. But without going on too much, as it's going to sound like a negative diatribe, but if you took the example of one of those companies, they will come into your bank account and they'll take out their commission on a direct debit basis out of your business. So they'll control your cash flow. And that probably is taking things a little bit too far. But it's happened, and hoteliers will rail against it and say, book direct, I'll give you a free breakfast, and all these other little plans we've got to try and regain our territory. It sounds a little bit like Brexit, actually, the two phenomena. One is saying we're much better off with Germany and France, and when equally others are saying we're better off without. But for me, I would make the online travel agents work for me rather than rail against them and say I don't need them.
I'm just trying to think, in the world of Google, it'd be harder to find a hotel that I wanted to stay in without these sort of aggregators. For my business, we use Booking.com. It's just easy. Everything's there. You put in your filters. I'm just thinking, how would you do that without it?
Well, it's the difference between knowledge and information. Yeah. You get into a taxi and you expect a taxi in London for the taxi driver to have the knowledge to be able to get you where you want to go without reference. Yeah. You get into an Uber, the guy's got information. It's going to get you to the same place, but he's just using technology to do it. Which do you place the premium on? I'm not sure. In many cases, it's easier to take an Uber these days because ordering one is much more reliable. You know how long it's going to be before an Uber cab comes along to pick you up.
Yeah. I remember talking of Uber, because they're pretty magical in some ways, but it might have been pure luck, but I was waiting for a taxi 45 minutes, and I thought, I'll just check if I can get an Uber. No word of a lie, 3 minutes it was there. And that is just pure luck, clearly. Yeah. But I just said to the taxi guy, because I was at the rank, I said, I'm just going to jump in an Uber. And I felt for him, but 45 minutes, it was just like, and I feel like, you're right, but I do like Uber. It's a guilty pleasure, isn't it?
A guilty pleasure. Yeah. Don't tell your friends.
No, just don't tell cabbies, because I'll get thrown out. So how do you go about owning your customer if you're using these sort of like aggregators? Do they share all the information?
Well, let me give you one other example, which is pretty pernicious, I must say, in that the online travel agent will deliver you the customer, but they will encrypt the email address and contact details for that customer. So unless I ask that customer to re-register the whole thing by hand,
which stresses them out
and takes time, they'll say, no, I've already done it through Booking.com and I've already paid you, so why do I need to do it again? And they get really cross with you because we all want things so instantly. But it is wrong that I've got people staying in my hotel that I don't own. I certainly don't own that data unless I ask someone to opt in and give me that data afresh. So that's one issue. But I suppose the biggest issue is a very common sense one. make that customer feel special, make them want to have a relationship. They'll want to come back with you, and they'll book direct because the girl who checked them in on reception was so nice, they'll ring and ask for her.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So one thing we've seen over the last 20 years or so is that there has been a massive polarisation within the hotel business, and the bottom end has had to catch up with the middle, and the middle being the likes of Travelodge, Premier Inn. But they're not a bad middle. You know what you're getting, really, in some ways. How does that work out? How has that changed the dynamics of the hotel industry?
I'm not quite sure where we're going to define middle here, Stelios. I think if you looked at Travelodge and Premier Inn as being budget offerings, they've come in theory at the beginning to be a very powerful low-cost operator, and of course as they've got more dominant and stronger, so they've moved into the middle ground territory and bumped their prices up. The top-end experiential hotel will always do well because people book that for a treat or an experience. It's the middle ground that used to be called 3-star hotels, which has been squeezed because people either want the convenience of budget or a special occasion. So that middle section of the sandwich, if you like, has got thinner and thinner and thinner. Some of this is predicated on how people like to develop buildings. So in a lot of market towns, you might find some occasion for student accommodation, which is a relatively safe investment for a property developer. But for others, they'll say, well, if I buy this building, I know that I can go to Whitbread and get a really strong covenant for the Premier Inn brand, so I'll rent or lease my property to them. I can go to the bank will lend me the money I need to do the development because they know Whitbread / Premier Inn are going to be the tenant. So both Travelodge and Premier Inn have grown enormously through the lease model. If you look at Lord Forte, when he first started his company, he was buying hotels and leasing them back all over the place. And that was a very, very interesting way for him to grow his model. A lease is a function. Often it will only last 25 to 30 years. So you have to hand the keys back or negotiate to extend that lease. But that's one of the main reasons you've seen such a phenomenal rise in the number of budget hotels in the UK, because it suits construction companies to build knowing they've got security and very little risk. If you're building houses on a speculative basis, you're never quite sure whether you've got all that cash out. Am I going to be able to sell? Am I going to risk all this and then find I've got empty real estate that I can't shift and I'm owing far too much money to the bank? So quite often a budget hotel is quite an interesting and safe play for a property developer.
A friend of mine was saying that he stayed in a Premier Inn with the family, and it was just really, really good price. And he said it was for a little cheap stay away, and he just goes, I would never risk staying in a little B&B because I just wouldn't risk it. And I do wonder, so there's some detriment there, isn't there, really, in some ways? There
is, and also there's this other beast that's appeared called Airbnb, which is an extraordinary phenomenon. My children, who are both in their 30s, incredibly rare that they would stay in a hotel, not because they're sick of their dad talking about hotels all the time, but it's just because they want the intimacy and the spectacle of staying in someone's house with Airbnb. And they will, particularly when they travel overseas, they only book Airbnb.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I missed that boat, but I stayed once and I did not get it.
You didn't have a good time?
No, I just didn't like it. I just felt weird. You know what? I like to go in a hotel, kick my shoes off, have a shower, do what I want to do. I don't want anybody knocking on the door. I don't want to feel like someone's in the room. Yeah. It's just, and I think that's what hotels have going for them, in my opinion. I don't know. There's so many other places to stay other than the Airbnb. But how can they, going off on a tangent slightly, how can they be worth more than, let's say, the Hilton Group? How can that valuation be even possible?
Optimism, that's all it is.
So it's based on what they could do.
It's hotter. It's where they think they might get. As with a lot of tech companies, it's the promise, it's not the reality.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me that, I don't know, I don't think I'd want to stay in anybody's house. I don't know.
Okay.
Unless maybe it was just me. I'd just rather stay in a hotel. I don't know. But, yeah, it's weird. But yeah, tell your kids to stay in hotels, man. Why would you want to stay in an Airbnb? Someone's been walking around in their boxer shorts, in the house, It's just,
I'm not going to hold that thought for too long, Stelly.
I don't know, but everyone probably, maybe the generation below me is Airbnb fans. But I know some people that have been, a friend of mine went to Holland, and I think it was Amsterdam, and he stayed in Airbnb, but it was the house was empty, so that's...
Well, maybe that's the experience my kids have had, and certainly if they're going to Venice, they wouldn't go and stay in a hotel, they'd go and stay in an Airbnb, And if any hotspot, they would try and go Airbnb.
So in your experience, like within the hotel business, what probably attracts people to Airbnb, do you think?
I think the surprise, the excitement, the delight, but almost always it's the proximity. So if you say, I'd like to stay this part of Edinburgh, or let's take that as the example, hotspot, but I'd like to be really close to Princes Street. I see the hotels are full. I go on Airbnb and 7 apartments available to you, up and down, privately owned by different people on Princes Street. And you think, well, that's the one that's closest to the shop I want to see, or closest to the entrance to the castle I want to be by. So I think it's the location that will drive the demand.
I think the apartment business is interesting because a few times I've stayed in Covent Garden and it's been an apartment and it's really close by. It's just beyond the shops. But that's not Airbnb. Well, I did it through Booking.com. But if it's exactly the same sort of thing, then I can see why that's interesting. But I don't think I'd stay in someone's house. That's just me. But I'm clearly a bit hung up about that, aren't I? Really?
You can move on if you want to.
So, if we look at the likes of TripAdvisor, when we spoke about them last time, you mentioned that it's not probably been as bad for you guys as what it has probably been for some others. Can you see? Do you see TripAdvisor changing a little bit? You mentioned that you probably have seen a little bit of change there.
Well, TripAdvisor started as everybody's friend, as a source of information, and was quite neutral in its more altruistic days at the beginning. It's a free site populated with a sort of pioneering volunteer spirit. It's changed ownership in the last few years, and now it's quite clear that the rankings are skewed according to how much money you spend to have a placement. So it's not down to just the quality of the reviews. A lot of it is, are you using, to use some of the language, meta-search devices, or are you placing any advertisements? Are you encouraging people to transact to your hotels through the booking engines that are placed with them?
Right.
So it's become another online travel agent. The other curious piece of research I discovered, I assumed it would, how many 5-star boxes have you got filled in, and have you got a very small number of awfuls? I thought that would be the arbiter of the decision, but it doesn't seem to be. People seem to set great store by how you handle a complaint. And if they look on a website and see that someone's complained and it's not been responded to, or not responded in a particularly friendly way, that will turn people off. But if they can see the management are on it, immediately said, I'm terribly sorry, we've got it wrong, please come back, we'll regain your confidence. I think that bearing your soul does seem to pay dividends in terms of people's perception of the quality of the hotel.
Because I know many people...
So complaining is a good thing in a way.
I know many people that say never respond. And then others say, well, if you do respond, keep it very sort of professional. Don't be personally upset. Obviously, you probably don't get personally upset because you've got many sites, but there's some people that will get personally upset.
I have managers in the company who do get personally upset and they decide to pick a fight.
Yeah.
And I get very, very cross with them because I just don't think you should ever do that. You shouldn't belittle someone. It's all right for the public to have a pop at you, but you can't have a pop back in a public environment. If there's an issue, you need to get a personal one-to-one contact with the customer. Take it private, let the person have their say, and see what you can do to put it right.
And obviously, I suppose I wonder if fake reviews aren't really a big thing, or do you see that sometimes?
Well, you see it, and you see some savvy people who decide to make a little hobby out of complaining to get a free stay, and then double their money and have another go.
Oh, really?
They're not that frequent, but there are one or two people who are mischievous like that and will play that game. I take the view, life's too short. If you get caught with a few of those,
they are a minority.
They are a minority. It may happen. That's part of the averages. The rest of the time, you just have to treat each complaint on its merits and see what you can do to make the customer feel better.
I think I always say to people that the quickest way you can get it private, remove that exchange from public, and then let's take it private, be as civil as possible, and then just take their word for it, really, to some degree. But I don't know, I think that people work hard, so when they see some sort of negativity, they get really offended by it. But you can't pick a fight with customers, because they are customers ultimately. Well,
one of my early experiences at a particular hotel, which will also remain nameless, I'd just become general manager of this hotel. It was day 3. It's a Saturday night. The place was full. And I noticed one of our waiters go through to an inglenook fireplace with a gleaming, steaming hot pot of coffee for the old brigadier who'd just finished his supper and wanted coffee in the lounge. And next thing I saw was this fine old gentleman walking towards me with a very ruddy complexion and a little bit of steam coming off his left shoulder. Fetch me the manager. I said, well, I am the manager. How can I help you? They said, no, fetch me the real manager. I said, I'm afraid I'm as good as you're going to get. There's nobody higher.
Sorry about this. Yeah.
Does there appear to be a problem? Yes, I do have a problem. I said, well, look, why don't you come through here, sit down with me over just along this corridor here, and I'll get you a pot of coffee. Coffee? I don't want a pot of coffee. Your bungling waiter's just managed to pour an entire coffee pot of steaming hot coffee all over me, and I'm furious. I said, well, I'm sorry, I was just trying to help. He said, no, I wish to complain, and you, young man, will stand there and take it like a man. So I stood to attention while this man vented his spleen. And I waited and I waited and waited, and eventually he'd run out of steam. And I just said, look, I'm really sorry. It's supposed to be a special evening. We haven't got it right. Please let me have your card. I'll write to you. And bless him, he agreed to come back about 2 weeks later with his wife. We did the best we possibly could. And they became the staunchest friends to that particular property. They're really good allies. But I must admit there was a moment when the hairdryer was blowing all over me and he was absolutely apoplectic with rage. And I thought, why am I really in this business? Do I want to be doing this on a Saturday night? But hey.
To be fair, he did get coffee tipped on him, though.
Yes, we had made a mess of his suit. There was the dry cleaning, there was his... oh dear, I can't think about it anymore. It's too frightening.
So how do you give me a little bit insight on how do you sort of like seek out a property that you're looking for? Do you start with a location? Do you start with a property? Is it a combination?
Well, it goes two ways. Sometimes an owner of a property will come to us and say, I've got this property, I've been running it for years, my children don't want to run it, I don't want to sell, could you help me? I need a fresh pair of eyes, could you come in and see what you can do to improve the trading fortune of the hotel? So that's a nice little invitation. But other times we will be researching at all times which cities are hot, where perhaps there's a disconnect between the amount of bedrooms that are available and the demand. So as an example, York is a very hot spot provincially in Britain at the moment. Chester has been for the last few years. Manchester is still a very hot area in terms of demand outstripping supply, but that's been corrected. There's a lot more stock moving into Manchester. And then there are other cities which are a bit more marginal, whereas you might say you might venture one or two more hotels in Bristol, but not sure the demand would cope if you did 8 or 9 of them.
Yeah.
London, however, defies all gravity, and you just keep piling more hotels and hotels, and it just keeps sucking them all up. So we would look very carefully at the city first. Then once we understood the city dynamics, then we'd start to identify the streets. And we would then go out to meet people who we felt could find or identify the buildings for us, who had really strong local knowledge, and make some friends either with people close to the planning process or developers who can spot a suitable opportunity for us. And then we'll make a move. And either that would be to buy an existing hotel, or it would be to take a building and repurpose it and turn it into a hotel.
Do you have a preference out of the two?
It's quicker to buy existing hotels and massage them, but perhaps the most rewarding properties we've been involved in over the years have been the ones where we've completely invented a new hotel. We've done, 12 of those in 20 years. We're doing 4 of them next year, strangely. So those are great fun, and there's something quite unique about the bonding that takes place with the staff when you all come together with a common purpose, that you're going to open a building on a fixed date. You've never worked with each other before. The waitress is trying to work out whether she wants to work for that chef. The chef's trying to work out whether he thinks the housekeeper's neat and tidy. And eventually you form this kinship, and it's deeply bonding. So much so we had a Spanish waitress from Barcelona many years ago with whom we were opening a hotel, and we ran the team training day the day before we were due to open, and we got out a bottle of champagne to toast the future success of the hotel. And she raised her glass and said, I love being in this country. It is a beautiful place to be, and I love what you do today. It is all this marvelous team bondage. So team bondage became the
That's the thing now.
The thing. We don't do any team bonding. We do team bondage.
Sounds interesting. That's a good job you only employ adults. So, where you mentioned one thing that opened my eyes a little bit was when we met last. You said that a city has a feeling, and my question was to you: how does a city have a feeling, and what is it, and where does it come from?
It comes from the personality of the people. It comes from the proximity of the buildings, whether it's a grand esplanade like Southport or Liverpool, or it's compact and difficult to penetrate like the lanes in Brighton. That's the lovely part of Old Britain. You've still got this extraordinary diversity of architecture and topography which makes the difference. If you go to Newcastle, you never think of Newcastle as having probably the finest Georgian street in Britain. But Grey Street is a magnificent, wide boulevard going through the city. And I love Newcastle. People there are extremely friendly. They don't wear enough clothes.
Even in the winter, they don't.
Even in the winter.
Yeah.
But boy, do they know how to have fun.
And to sort of think of a few of these then, now that you mentioned that the people in Newcastle like to have fun, you also mentioned that for you, Manchester is very similar to New York, and there was that work hard, play hard ethic. And then what other sort of like comparisons could you draw for us, like in terms of cities? What would you say the people are like, or, can you think of any?
Well, I think Edinburgh is a very handsome city. I think the people are elegant and refined and intelligent, reserved, cautious, intellectual.
I should be from Edinburgh, I think.
Yeah. It's a good city, but it's not necessarily where you. If Edinburgh was your best pal for a stag night, I wouldn't be going out with Edinburgh organising my stag do. I'd go out with Glasgow, I think.
Yeah, probably.
I'd have more fun and I'd get a bigger hangover the following day. Look, I'm a simple West Country boy, so for me, Bath is the hometown, and anything West Country I'm terribly fond of. That's the bit where I go doughy-eyed. So there's a lovely line about the difference between residents of Bath and Bristol. They said, well, what's the difference between the two? I said, well, Bristol man knows the price of everything and the value of nothing, and the Bath man knows the value of everything and can't afford it. So.
No, Bath is very nice.
It is very pretty. It's particularly pretty if you know how to get through it without hitting all the major tourist traffic. So
train from Bristol.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I found so far.
Yeah. So I think you're right.
Park in Bristol, 10 minutes on the train, or 11 minutes.
Very true. And then the station's close to everything you need to see in Bath.
Walk,
so yeah.
Even though I don't like walking, but I do, for there. So, do you think? So, talking about accessibility a little bit, and people will figure out why shortly. But do you think hotels could do better for people with accessibility issues?
Well, you're talking to me about my pet subject, really. I think years ago we should be grateful the government put in a special provision that the Disability Act meant that you couldn't open to trade unless you had enough ratio of rooms specifically built for disabled people, with wider access for wheelchairs, shower units, sit-down shower seats, and alarm cords next to the bed. Unfortunately, this meant that people did the compliant thing and did what the law required with no regard for the look and feel. So typically a disabled room in a conventional hotel in this country is next to the lifts. It has a poor view, and it's medicalised in the way it's looked.
Especially the bathrooms.
Especially the bathrooms. So my crusade, if you want to give it a term at the moment, is to make people think, how do we turn this on its head so someone could walk into a hotel or push themselves in a wheelchair into a hotel and say, I'd like an upgrade to a disabled suite, please. Because nobody ever asks that. Why don't we have disabled suites? Why don't we have rooms which are beautiful and joyous and aesthetically delightful? It's because nobody's ever set the bar that high. So rather than going back to government and saying you need to change this and have a bronze, silver, gold award system, we decided to set up our own award scheme, which is currently called the Blue Badge Access Awards, and that's an annual thing which ranges from hotels that go the extra mile to Loo of the Year, ludicrous Loo of the Year, which is where we lampoon ones who always leave the Christmas decorations in the disabled loo for 364 days of the year.
Oh, really?
It's a golden rule of any hotel. If you want to know where anything's going to be left, the first place to look is in the disabled loo.
Oh, really?
It's surplus storage room. And that's insulting to someone who's disabled. So anyway, we've been working very hard to become better at this ourselves. And we've been working hard to make it a main agenda item for others.
It's talking about like the style of them. I suppose they would say, or a general hotel would say, well, everyone should be happy that it exists. They're always they just feel clinical. You could be in a McDonald's disabled toilet. You could be in a hospital disabled toilet. But if they did stylize it to like every other room, for argument's sake, then it wouldn't shock someone who wasn't disabled.
Well, the paradox,
when it's not being used.
The paradox is when you're full, it is quite likely there'll be times when your disabled rooms are being let to able-bodied.
That's happened to me.
Period.
Yeah.
And at that point, the receptionist would tend to apologise to you. I'm sorry, I'm relegating you to a disabled room. So A, that's an insult to the disabled person. B, it's a lost cash opportunity, because if you decorated the room nicely in the first place, you could get more, or at least the same rate. So making it a non-issue is part of the ambition, that it just becomes a matter of course that people are reinventing their bedroom spaces because they want to.
And when you talk to these hoteliers and so on, what is it? What's their biggest hang-up? Is it the cost?
I think it's lack of thinking about it before, lack of independence among certain branded hotel operators where they say, well, I agree with you, but I can't do that unless head office tell me to. But for the more independently minded hotelier, I've definitely seen the pendulum swinging already. And I've seen a number of exemplars of hotels who've really gone the extra mile. And as soon as they've got into the subject and started to become fluent in it, they've said, hang on a minute, it's not just about the way we dress the room, it's about how the staff are trained, it's about how we give directional signage to people. Have we catered for people who are badly sighted? Have we catered for people who have hearing difficulties? It's not just wheelchairitis, it's all these other iterations. So,
because everyone just thinks of wheelchair when it comes to disability, don't they, really, in some ways?
Well, it's interesting. There's a hotel in Liverpool called the Shankly Hotel.
I've been there.
You've been there? Well, they run autism awareness courses, and that's on the spectrum of disability, I suppose. But pretty random act. But good for them. Thank goodness someone's doing it.
I wonder if that started internally, like they thought,
I think it's a family member that it was an issue, and they decided they were going to make
That's a lovely hotel as well.
It's a great hotel. It's full of fun. Bit of swagger.
Yeah. Just like me. Yeah. So, is there a hotel other than that you can think of that's really sort of pushing the boat out in terms of accessibility?
Well, I'll give you two answers. There is an Edwardian hotel being built in Leicester Square at the moment, which will open next year, 350 bedrooms, and the mission statement is to create the best possible disabled rooms they can in the capital. So let's wait and see what happens there. Bit of self-promotion here. We're building a hotel in Manchester called Hotel Brooklyn, 190 bedrooms, opening February 2020. And 16 of those rooms will be designed to as high a level as we could possibly imagine for disabled folk. So there'll be some rooms with hoists permanently tracked into the ceiling so you can get out of a wheelchair and into bed with special assistance. There will be rooms designed for the carers to be able to be adjacent and yet private. So we've really thought about this long and hard. We've put in accessibility statements and taken a lot of counsel from people who really have expertise in this area. So I'm hoping we'll be able to say we're talking about it, but we're walking the walk as well as talking the talk on the subject.
I hope it's a massive success, because then if it's a success, then others will follow.
Yeah, but it doesn't. If you look at how television is handling this now, Strictly Come Dancing, it smacks of tokenism. But there's always a disabled person on there now, and the BBC seems to like to make that disability obvious. So I don't have my bottom half of my arm, or I'm missing half a leg.
Yeah, they do. And I've got a young boy, and he's 5, and give or take, and I don't go into quarters or months, sorry. And so he's going to be 5 until he's 6.
Okay.
Yes. And And on TV, on one of the CBeebies things, there's a young girl who's missing the bottom of her arm, let's say, and my other nephew came round, who's probably about 4 or 5 years older, and he was just like, "Oh my God, what am I seeing on TV?" He couldn't get his head around it. But my son was just like, "What?
That's normal."
Yeah, it's normal, and I think that's a good thing. One question I've always said to the wife is, do you think, like, if there was a similar person, so the only difference is just the arm bit, the bottom bit, would someone who was classed as, and I do this in quotations, able-bodied, because I don't know what you call it, would they have lost a job because of that? And I do wonder. There is a bit of tokenism. I wonder, But.
Well, look, the issue. It's being aired as a topic, and that's progress.
Definitely.
There was a time if you were reading the weather on TV, and you were wearing a short sleeve dress, you wouldn't have been allowed on television if you were missing an arm. But these days, you do have very pleasant, personable people presenting the news, and they're just outing their issues. Yeah. And I think, well, hurrah! It has to become something that becomes a non-issue.
It just shows that we're all different shapes and sizes. And,
for sure.
Just because you are disabled doesn't mean, or less abled. I don't know if I like the word disabled, but whatever the word is. But I think that, just because doesn't mean you're any less.
Well, there's one other little factor coming into play here, Stelios, which is the ageing population. So currently, recorded figures tell us there are 12 million people out of a population of 60 million who have some form of compromise or disability in their lives. As we get older, proportionately as a population, there's going to be a horrendous issue with people with significant mobility issues through old age and a lack of faculty that's performing as it used to. So
people will live longer. They'll live longer. But unhealthier, let's say, for argument.
More unhealthily, but definitely in need of assistance, and their independence will be compromised. And the one thing I can say with certainty is disability makes you antisocial. It compromises your appetite to go out into the marketplace and foist your disabilities onto others. So you feel anxious about going to a restaurant. Will they be able to help me get to the loo on time? And all those sorts of other barriers that you put up in your head about whether you're prepared to go out or not.
Regarding Brexit, just one last time, what would you say... would you say that at the moment, I think when we spoke last time, you sort of mentioned that general conferencing is down. London, Edinburgh and Stratford-upon-Avon areas are sort of doing well. Anything else you could sort of lean on in terms of Brexit?
Well, that was the last time we had a conversation, which I guess was a month ago. Yeah. Here we are, back end of August, and we're seeing the last of the summer wine, WHINE, I think, because we're about to go into rigor mortis with Boris Johnson taking us to a most extraordinary political impasse. Philosophically, I could always understand the logic behind saying I want to leave the European Union. But I selfishly have been in business long enough to have worked through 4 full-bore recessions, and I just didn't want another one. And everything about Brexit has led us to a point where we're going to have another recession. We're already in it. People are just not shouting it out, to use your term. So I didn't want that consequence, because you never know whether they're going to last 2 years or 10 years. But it's here, it's now. Whether we come in or out after the 31st of October doesn't really matter, so long as there is a result one way or the other. If it's then more constipation and more hung parliament and more not knowing because there's a constitutional impasse and Brexit is still the only topic we can talk about, that is going to cause civil unrest, and something's got to go bang. I do see a parallel with the poll tax riots, where the government just misjudged the mood of the nation, and eventually the nation said, we've had enough of this, this is just wrong. We're out on the streets, we're letting off cordite all over the place, we're going to march on Trafalgar Square, and we're going to blow up central London. We're angry. And I do think a lot of the symptoms are here at the moment. And you've only got to see it at a dinner party. People say, well, are you a Remainer or are you a Leaver? And people want to throttle each other. It's extraordinary.
There was a time when politics was private.
Yes.
I think I mentioned to you when I used to go to school, I used to see like red and blue posters in the windows. I go home and I say to my dad, oh, what's all that about? And he goes, I'll tell you, but never talk about it to your friends, never talk about it anywhere. And that's gone. There's no such thing as people keeping things to themselves anymore. Everyone's in their little teams. You know, I hate him, I hate her, and we just begin. But no one can even... I think politics has just been absolutely smashed completely over here lately.
It's not going to be the same again.
No,
that's
I don't think so. Because I think where everyone fell into sort of like a couple of camps, main camps, which is Labour and sort of Conservatives, that's just been completely smushed together now.
Yeah.
So, but I think that I was listening to an interesting podcast, the BBC podcast the other day, and I'll send it over to you, and it was saying how Germany is probably on the brink, if not already in a recession.
Yeah.
And it went through all of the reasons. And they were saying that probably no one should blame it on Brexit, because there's just lots of other reasons as to why these countries are in a sort of a state of decline, let's say. And then there was another thing I wanted to touch on as well regarding Brexit, but it's gone. But you made your points really well, and but I do think that that stagnation you mentioned a month ago is probably, hopefully, by the looks of it, going away. I like to think, because there's no stagnation at the moment, is there?
No, there isn't.
There seems to be some impetus now.
There's an impetus, but there's also possibly how lemmings feel when they know they're on a mission. None of us have any idea what's on the other side of that door once we walk through it.
It's true. So you've been through this sort of a similar thing that you said before with the poll tax, right? I'm going to say, what sort of things can, I don't know, what heals people after this sort of division? Or is it just unprecedented?
I think there'll be a lot of marching on various destinations. I think there'll be a lot of clashes with police. I think there'll be other counter marches. But I don't think it'll just be a working class revolution and aggro on the streets. I think this is much more pan in terms of the ages that it affects. This isn't just a youth thing. It goes through from 18 to 80, really, in terms of the call to action. And I just feel the weakness of the May versus Corbyn axis has served us very badly for far too long. Neither could land a punch on each other. At least Johnson's firing out there and taking a lead. I'm not going to say whether I think he's an idiot or a clairvoyant. I don't know yet.
I don't think. I think that sort of rhetoric doesn't help anybody. I just think that you see it all the time. Like, I'm not a fan of Trump, and I don't have to be because I'm not in America. But if you don't get behind someone, you don't actually win. You've got to be in it to win it, and you can't just say, "Oh, look at me, he's a bumbling idiot," or whatever it may be that the insult is of the day. I don't think it helps. I just think that it's just a way of venting your feeling. But
my greatest fear, it is the end of the United Kingdom as a united force. I do think Scotland would have every reason to. And if Sturgeon was bright, she'd be saying, well, I should have started putting some SNB candidates into Carlisle and Newcastle and Sunderland and coming south. I'll run Westminster on my own terms rather than saying I want independence, but it's too late now. But if you look at the leader of the Scottish Conservative branch has resigned today, and you just think, well, I can't see how it recovers in our relationship between England and Scotland. I do think it's over.
Yeah, interesting, because when I talk to a lot of the sort of Scottish fishermen, they're just very pro-Brexit, But I think the way it is at the moment, I don't think anybody thinks past one thing at a time. Yeah. No one's thinking 20 years down the line. Everyone's just thinking October at the moment, and then after that, we'll see what happens next. So, what we'll do, we'll talk about the syndrome that you were afflicted with 14 years ago. And I've started it like that because I'm fully aware that I'm going to say it wrong. So tell us about what happened 14 years ago and give everyone a bit of backstory there.
Okay, well, the syndrome is called Gillian Barre syndrome, named after two French doctors who discovered the malaise, one called Guillain and the other called Barre. Please don't ask me to spell it just now. Best way to remember it is getting better slowly. It was coming up to Christmas 2004. I'd been trying to do a deal which was way beyond my skill set, and without realising it, I'd become incredibly stressed trying to get the deal over the line, which we finally managed to do around about the 13th of December 2004, and I had developed a dry hacking cough during the long hours of trying to get the deal completed, which wouldn't go away. I ignored it like all men do. And as soon as the deal was completed, I thought to myself, great, I can press my personal accelerator and go faster now. Tried to do so, and nothing happened. And I thought, something's not right. But I carried on working stupidly. I should have taken some rest. And just as I came into Christmas Eve that year, I developed tingling in my fingertips, like pins and needles, and my toes. And within 24 hours, I went from that diminishing of my reflexes in the perimeters into being completely paralysed from the neck downwards, which was a very scary period of time. I thought I'd gone. One black-humoured moment at the point where I was admitted to hospital and the doctor said, we think we know what's wrong with you, but we're not absolutely certain. You might have polio, but we're running some more tests. It's highly likely your breathing will give out. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm quite attached to my breathing. I've done a lot of breathing. I'm good at it. I've studied. I've got a master's degree in breathing. Anyway, sure enough, this moment came, and I could feel my mouth opening and closing, and no air coming in or going, and everything went white, and I passed out. I had no idea what was about to happen to me, but when you go, you think, well, if I do wake up, what's on the other side? What's going to happen to me? You're thinking, well, if I've gone to the right place, maybe I'll get a bit of Beethoven, a bit of Brahms, a bit of Bach, I don't really mind, but something priapic and joyous and lovely. So I woke up and there was Noddy Holder singing, So Here It Is, Merry Christmas, everybody's having fun. And I thought, I'm definitely not in the right place.
Yeah.
And there I was in an intensive care hospital, paralysed from the neck downwards, stapled to a bed, unable to move my head or open and close my mouth properly. I couldn't speak.
How long did it take them to diagnose it?
4 days between start and finish, but please bear in mind, this was going in on Christmas Eve to a hospital. It's not a good time. Don't go into hospital on a Friday. Top tip.
Tell my dad all the time.
All the consultants have left. They've gone off to play golf for the weekend. There's no intelligence there. So the worse your command of English, the more you're likely you are to be working on a weekend in a hospital.
I've been reading your book, and one thing that struck out to me was that how sort of, I guess it probably wasn't like this at the time, but how sort of you made sort of a joke out of things, and you sort of like it's like a comedy book to some degree, like make jokes about people that come to visit someone else, and I hope they don't read the book because they'll probably know who they are, but it must have been a pretty worrying time though,
It was worrying, but I inherited my father's constitution, and he was always the sun will come out soon kind of guy, whereas my mother would have just worried herself to death. And if I'd inherited her genealogical outlook, I think I would have just stagnated and passed away. But thankfully, and black humour, I had enough of my old friends come and visit me who were determined to take the pee out of me. And I realised that being laughed at was part of the remedy. And I can't say I enjoyed it, but I certainly did chuckle. And I thought, oh, for goodness sake, stop feeling sorry for yourself. Turn it the other way.
Well, at least they treated you the same.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I think that's the thing. You don't want to be treated differently.
No, I didn't want to be put on a pedestal or pitied. And where I could make other people feel less uncomfortable in my company by making them smile, that was a gift. It was a lovely thing to be able to chuckle away with people.
So So 14 years ago, you were 10 months in hospital. What were those 10 months like? Being stuck there with different people? Because I guess people came in and out, and you're sort of like a...
Well, bear in mind, you can't do anything. Yeah. You can't hold a book. You can't...
So was it from the neck down, or was it just...
It's from the neck downwards. Yeah. So, and if I wanted to go to the loo, someone had to turn me over and sit me up and then move me around. I had to learn how to sit. I had to learn how to stand. I had to learn how to walk. I still can't walk very well now, but the fact that I have any level of independence, I'm just thrilled with, because there was a point when I thought, well, I'll never be able to do anything for myself again. So when you look at the kind of characters you're surrounded by, and you've got a fellow with motor neurone in the far corner of the ward, and you're thinking, well, he's got a one-way ticket, but I've got a return ticket. I might have a chance. I might not get back to the same railway station, but I could get close, and that gave me something to believe in and aspire to. So when it finally got to the point where I could initiate a little bit of physical movement myself, and it was a millimetre at a time, the sense of believing that I could make myself better was so enriching and enlightening. And I just felt so sorry for the other people around me who were not going to get better, and I didn't want to rub it in. So 7 months in hospital in Bath, 3 months in a rehab unit in Wimbledon, and then home, and then a whole panoply of occupational therapists and new home help regimen.
And how were people within the business? Like, were they quite chilled with it all, or?
Well, they protected me from a huge amount of it because I, really inconveniently had just disappeared without any sort of sick note or apology. So my partner, who I talked to you right about at the very beginning, stepped into the breach wonderfully, and I suppose most encouraging for me, never belittled me when I came back to work. There was not a sense of feeling, well, you sit in the corner and we'll tell you what's going on. It was immediately, come on, Robin,
They actually needed you back, yeah.
Well, I'm not sure they did. I think they made me feel as though I was needed. I think that was the skill.
It's a nice feeling, though.
Well, I didn't really know that at the time. It just felt I was able to contribute, and the sense of, well, I really didn't like dropping you all in it. If I can repay your faith in me, I'd like to do it now. So lots to be grateful for. I'm terribly fortunate that my then partner, Susie, had the disposition to said, I'm going to get you better. So I'm not sure I would have had the joy in my heart to have been able to do the same thing in reverse. But bless her, she just rolled her sleeves up and said, right, come on, we're going to get you well. And she was at my side throughout the journey to lift my spirits and get me better again. So
in some ways, very lucky in some ways. Because
exactly.
Yeah.
And I have to look at it like that. If I look through the cup half empty glass, it's just
well,
not
you can't just sit there and say, why me? You're just going to say, it is, just move on. But I think I've been reading the book and I'm halfway through, and I should have probably finished it by now, but I've been a little busy. But it is well written, and it's just, it just makes me laugh. I'm reading it, and I'm just thinking, I can't believe you said that. Like, and I think that's the other thing. There's probably no political correctness in that book.
Well, you better tell the listeners how to get hold of one.
Yes, well, I'm going to put the link on the thingy on the show notes, and they'll have a link, and I'll put a photo so they know which one's which. But it'll be from Amazon. Everything's from Amazon.
Yeah, it's all from Amazon.
Because if they order it today,
yes, there'll be Sunday afternoon. Yeah,
you can read it on Sunday afternoon. So let's move on to some staple sort of questions that we ask everybody. What would you say your favourite hotel and location is?
I'm very fond in America of a hotel called the Post Ranch Inn at Big Sur.
Okay. That's California?
It's California. It's a hotel that's built into the mountain top, so your rooms have grass and rock boulders over them, and the restaurant is suspended out at a great height, sitting over those cotton wool clouds that you'd expect to see dotted around the Golden Gate in San Francisco. I think that's the coolest hotel I know, so...
Nice. That sounds amazing.
It's cool. If you ever get a chance to go, it's just...
You're not going to try buy that one then?
I think it might be a little bit out of my price bracket.
So what would you say your favourite restaurant is?
Well, spatially, it's still a restaurant called Bibendum in London, which was originally made famous by Simon Hopkinson with a Terence Conran design, and I still love the look and feel. I had a bit of an epiphany in my life when I came up with an idea for a mineral water bottle using a very dark blue glass called Tenant, which launched in 1988. And I remember the first day I took it into that particular restaurant and sat it on the table, and the glass in the windows was being picked up by the sun as it came through, and it was dancing on the blue glass bottle. So that stuck in my memory. So very fond of that.
It's a lovely restaurant. I've been there once, and it's really nice. Oysters. Yeah.
Lovely stuff.
Yeah. And who has been a source of inspiration to you over the years?
Well, I was asked this question at a dinner party a little while ago, and I started to list a number of octogenarian heroes who I learnt so much from. And halfway through I thought, well, I better describe someone a bit younger, because this is just an homage to very old blokes. And I started to bang on about this fellow who'd come up with a concept called Yotel, which is a miniature bedroom. And I went on for 10 minutes, and the guy I was talking to just kept nodding and saying, oh, that's interesting. And I kept saying, this guy's got real chutzpah and energy and such vision and tenacity, and I really like him. And after about 10 minutes, I'd run out of steam. Thankfully, I hadn't said anything naughty or nasty about him. And then he leant forward towards me and said, that's very kind of you to tell me. He's my son.
No way. I bet he loved that.
He loved it, absolutely loved it. Then he told his son what I'd said, and we've become very good pals. Well, we were good pals before, but I think he couldn't believe someone could be so effusive on his part.
Oh, wow. And that's really nice, that is. I bet you had a feel-good moment that night.
It was a great evening, I must say, and he was very good company. But I did go on a bit, I'm afraid.
That's all right. And what book would you recommend, other than yours, because I'm going to recommend that. So what book would you recommend anyone should read, if there is one?
The first one has to be Birdsong by Sebastian Faulks. It's a masterpiece. But if I had to choose an author with any title by him, then William Boyd is my favourite author, and I love all his fiction work. So those two would be my best.
Excellent. Well, Robin, this has been an absolute pleasure. I want to thank you for your time, because I do know, I say this all the time, but you're a pretty guy. I came at the end of one of your meetings, and I just want to say thank you very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Stelios. Thank you so much.
We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I hope you all enjoyed episode 24 with Robin Sheppard as much as I did. I found Robin really interesting. As always, I learned so much talking to different people, and I hope you did too. For those of you who do want to buy a copy of the book A Solitary Confinement, you'll find it listed below in the show notes. Have a great day.